Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. My name is Ian Mercer. I'm a hydro engineer for Harris County's Municipal Water Authority, assigned to Pump Station 14 just outside Houston, Texas. If you're listening to this, if you still have power or some kind of backup storage, know this: the water wasn't poisoned, not in the traditional sense. It was engineered. I helped build the system that delivered it to over 300,000 people, and I didn't even know what I was doing until it was too late. It started with a low-pressure alarm. That was last Friday, mid-June, blistering heat already baking the pavement by 8 a.m. I'd driven in from Baytown, where I live, in a prefab duplex by the refinery. My route took me past the sprawling suburban developments south of the I-10, past fields that used to be rice paddies and cattle pens, but now looked like construction zones and half-finished dream homes. By the time I reached Station 14, the air already smelled like ozone and chlorine. Standard stuff. Station 14 was nothing glamorous. Just a squat two-story concrete structure surrounded by fencing and motion-triggered floodlights. The main pump hall held the triplex vertical turbine pumps, rated for 30,000 gallons per minute each, mounted on a reinforced concrete floor with a direct intake channel from the Trinity River Aqueduct. Massive Allen Bradley control panels lined the walls, humming quietly behind protective plexiglass. My job was routine: monitor filtration rates, verify chemical feed accuracy, update logbooks, and check telemetry links back to our SCADA network. I'd been doing it for 6 years. Bachelor's from Texas, AANDM, licensed PE. Water was my career, and I was good at it. But that Friday was different. We'd gotten a level 2 maintenance alert. Low chloramine residuals in Zone 7, somewhere out past Clear Lake. The readings didn't make sense. We had remote chlorine analyzers in the field, real-time monitoring devices, and they were reporting a drop-off far faster than normal decay rates. Something was consuming the disinfectant. Or something was alive in the system. At first, I thought it was just a sensor error. These things happen: mud dauber nests, false readings from air bubbles, or corrosion on the electrodes. I drove out to the booster substation myself, Booster 7B, located near an old subdivision called Ridgebrook Park. It was one of those places that felt stuck in time: rusted basketball hoops, faded plastic mailboxes, and American flags baked colorless by the sun. When I unlocked the cabinet to check the analyzer, the inside was wet. Not from rain. This was internal, condensation or seepage. The sample line tubing had turned a faint brownish yellow. I ran a quick field test with a portable Hatch colorimeter and my own reagents. Free chlorine was at 0. No residuals at all. Worse, the total organic carbon, TOC reading was spiked, 10 times higher than the EPA limit. I took a sample back to Station 14, running it through the spectrophotometer. The results came up flagged in red. Unknown biological activity, turbidity off the charts. I'd never seen anything like it. I sent an encrypted report up to my supervisor, David Klein, mid-40s, former Army Corps engineer turned bureaucrat. He was one of those guys who wore tactical cargo pants to work and drove a matte black F-150 with tinted windows. Always said he trusted numbers, not people. When I told him what I found, he didn't even look surprised. He just asked, "How long until Zone 7 is fully flushed?" "Depends," I said. "If we go full bore from the tank at elevated tower 3, maybe 8 hours. Why?" He nodded slowly, then tapped something on his tablet and said, "Then let it run. No shutdowns. We need to maintain pressure." That was the first red flag. If chloramine residuals drop too low, we always isolate and flush. Containment 101. But here, I was being told to do the exact opposite. And that's when the trucks started arriving. 4 unmarked white semis pulled into the station parking lot. No DOT markings, No license plates. Just two-man teams offloading sealed steel drums labelled Oxidizer Class 5.1 and others with labels I didn't recognise. Alphanumeric strings like VCT 9329X. The drivers wore civilian clothes, but moved with military precision. One of them caught me watching and gave a short, curt nod. "Who approved this?" I asked David. "Federal request," he said. "New biosupplementation initiative, emergency water quality support. Don't worry, it's under control." Under control. The next 12 hours were chaos. We were told to inject the new compound, VX9 additive, directly into the reservoir inflow line at a controlled rate of 0.5 ppm. I protested. "There's no MSDS on this," I said. "You can't just inject unknowns into a municipal supply." David showed me a digital document with a Department of Homeland Security seal and a big red authorization classified, Section 721B. It didn't look forged. "Just do your job, Ian." I did. For the next 6 hours, I calibrated the metering pumps and logged every reading, every spike in residuals, every pressure change. By nightfall, telemetry showed the additive had reached every major loop in zones 5, 6, and 7. Then the calls started coming in. Not to me, but to dispatch. I heard them over the radio scanner on the maintenance desk. Resident reports neighbour collapsed after vomiting. EMS en route. 3 children at Edgewood Elementary, unresponsive. Possible contamination event. Ambulances requested. I looked at David. "What's going on?" He didn't answer. He was staring at the SCADA map, eyes scanning the expanding radius of Zone 7. Then he said, almost under his breath, "It's faster than expected. By midnight, Harris County issued a do not use advisory, not just a boil water notice. Do not use, don't cook, don't bathe, don't touch." The city's emergency broadcast system repeated the message in 3 languages, but it was already too late. The infection was inside people by then. We just didn't know what it was yet. I went outside to breathe and get away from the hum of the equipment. That's when I saw the first victim. A man, maybe 40, in blue jeans and a white t-shirt, stumbled toward the outer gate. His arms were limp, feet dragging, face pale under the sodium floodlights. At first, I thought he was drunk. Then I saw the blood dripping from his nose. He moved like a broken puppet, muscles twitching, limbs misfiring. His eyes were glassy, and something reddish bubbled from his mouth. "Sir, are you okay?" I called out, moving towards him. He lunged. Fast, faster than anyone that unstable should have moved. He slammed into the chain link, grabbed at the fence with bloodied hands, and began clawing, literally clawing, at the steel like a rabid animal. He didn't speak, he didn't scream, just snarled. That's the only word for it. I hit the panic button on my key fob, locking down the outer perimeter. The electric bolts hissed shut with a hydraulic thunk. The man bashed his face against the metal again and again until his skin split. Then he dropped. No heartbeat, just stillness. David came outside, gun drawn. He had a sidearm. I hadn't even known. Looked like a Sig Sauer P320 with a tactical light. "Get back inside," he ordered. "Lock the inner doors." "Who was that?" I demanded. "What's happening to people?" He didn't answer. The next morning, National Guard trucks rolled in. Not to rescue us, to quarantine us. Helicopters circled, roads were blocked. A giant mobile CDC command unit set up a half-mile down the access road. We were told, via bullhorn, to remain in the building. They didn't say the word virus, not yet, but I knew. I'd seen the water under the microscope. I'd watched something multiply in the sample overnight. It had a flagellated structure, like a protozoa, but larger, and it moved towards the light under the slide. Whatever it was alive and synthetic. Later that day, a new man arrived. He wore a charcoal grey suit, with a silver DHS badge on a lanyard, and introduced himself as Special Agent Rourke. Bald, no nonsense, probably ex-military. He asked me to step outside with him. We stood next to the fence, looking out at the empty road. "How long have you worked at this facility?" he asked. 6 years. "You've overseen every system upgrade?" "Yes. Why?" He turned to me, his eyes unreadable. "Then it's likely you were part of the final delivery mechanism." My stomach dropped. "You mean this was intentional?" He nodded. "This was the pilot test. Urban vector propagation via public infrastructure, not a foreign attack, not a bioterror event. A domestic deployment test. Your name was flagged during system design integration. Your expertise in water modeling made you ideal." I felt my knees go weak, but I didn't sit down. I needed to hear the rest. Needed to understand how the systems I'd spent years maintaining had been weaponized without my knowledge. Special Agent Rourke didn't flinch as he laid it out. The VX9 compound wasn't a treatment. It wasn't even a contaminant in the traditional sense. It was a delivery vector, genetically engineered to bypass traditional water filtration and treatment processes, designed to survive chloramine and UV disinfection. It bonded with residual organic material in the distribution lines and released its viral payload gradually through contact ingestion. "They needed someone like you," Rourke continued. "Someone smart enough to design efficient hydraulic models, but not embedded enough to ask the wrong questions. You helped build the vector map without realizing it. You oversaw the integration of the new pressure balance valves, calibrated the flow-through timings, optimized the district hydraulics. All of it made the deployment cleaner, faster. It went straight into homes, schools, hospitals. I wanted to deny it, but the worst part was I had noticed things. Extra code patches in the SCADA firmware, pressure anomalies that had no documented maintenance requests, calibration data that didn't align with the physical maps. I chalked it all up to sloppy municipal oversight. Contractors cutting corners or upgrades pushed without proper documentation. Now I realized those oddities were planted. Someone wanted me to see them, or at least to not question them deeply enough. "Why test something like this on US soil?" I finally asked, voice low, almost hoarse. "Because control is more valuable than morality," Rourke replied. "This wasn't just about the virus. It was about predictability, about how people respond. Quarantine efficiency, public panic curves, infrastructure overload thresholds. The virus is just the trigger. The data is what matters." That night, the compound went into full lockdown. National Guard set up mobile barriers at every major road junction leading to and from the facility. Station 14 had 3 staff members on duty: myself, Klein, and a tech named Yvonne Salinas. Yvonne was young, maybe mid-20s, sharp with telemetry, always had her earbuds in, barely looked up from her console unless there was an alarm. She was also the first one to get sick. It started with a headache, then nausea. Within 2 hours, she was shivering in the break room, her skin mottled and pale. I checked her vitals with the basic triage kit we kept in the emergency locker. Temperature 103.6, heart rate erratic. Her pupils were dilated and she couldn't keep her balance when she tried to stand. "She drank the tap water this morning," Klein muttered, pacing. "I saw her fill up at the break room sink. I told her not to." Yvonne tried to speak, but her jaw locked mid-sentence. Her breath hitched and then came in wet, ragged gasps. I placed her on her side and called for a med-evac through the encrypted DHS link. They denied the request. Instead, they sent 2 personnel in full protective gear to collect her. She didn't scream as they wheeled her away. She was unconscious by then, her mouth twitching slightly, as if her body was trying to mimic breathing it had forgotten how to do. Rourke watched it all without blinking. "That's phase 1. Fever, muscle spasms, neuroinflammation." I turned to him. "And phase 2? He said nothing for a long time, just stared at the far wall, as if seeing something I couldn't. Then he finally answered. "Autonomic suppression, then violent aggression. No higher brain function, no language, no empathy, just motor control and stimulus response. Think of it like an engineered form of rabies, but faster, meaner, and it replicates through contact. Contact? I asked. Like fluid transfer? Blood, saliva, even aerosolized under the right conditions. That's why they're not calling it what it is. That's why the CDC isn't on the news. The moment the word zombie hits the airwaves, the system collapses. It didn't take long for the infections to breach containment. A subdivision called Birch Run Estates had refused the lockdown order. Some people tried to drive north toward Humble, thinking they could beat the checkpoints. One infected child, just 6 years old, bit his mother in the car during the escape. She crashed on the 1960 overpass. First responders didn't know what they were dealing with. They found her walking through traffic an hour later, covered in blood, teeth exposed in a fixed grimace, eyes milky. She attacked 2 officers. Within minutes, 6 more people were bitten. The chain reaction had begun. Inside the control room at Station 14, I watched it unfold through drone feeds and live telemetry overlays. Red dots began blinking across the map. First 6, then 20, then over 50. The infection was spreading along roadways and water routes, every place people had touched or fled through. Rourke was right. This wasn't just a virus. It was a data model made flesh. By morning, the governor had ordered a Tier 5 emergency protocol. That meant full jurisdiction shift to federal control, deployment of mobile biocontainment units, and blanket media silence. No press helicopters, no local news. Cell service became patchy, data throttled. A silent information blackout had fallen over southern Harris County, and then Klein made his move. While I was recalibrating the UV dosage feeds, something that didn't matter anymore, but kept my hands busy, he accessed the server room. I caught him standing at the firewall terminal, typing in root-level commands. When I asked what he was doing, he turned around slowly, gun in hand. "I'm wiping the logs," he said simply. "All of it." "What? Why? We need those logs. They're the only record of what actually happened." He shook his head. "This isn't going to end with a Senate hearing and apologies. They'll bury everything. And if they don't, someone else will. But if my name's on this..." He didn't finish the sentence. "You helped them," I said. "You knew more than I did. You let this happen." "I followed orders. That's more than most people can say," he replied. "I tried to keep the system clean. I really did. But once the funding came through last winter, it was out of my hands. They used this station because of its access, its telemetry reach. They said it was a countermeasure test against bioterrorism, and maybe it was. But then the compound arrived, and I knew we weren't fighting anything. We were seeding it." He looked tired, older than I'd ever seen him. Then he turned back to the screen. "You can't stop it now, Ian. The virus is already in 5 zip codes. By the time we cut the mains, it'll be in Galveston Bay, in the shipyard, in the shrimping boats, maybe even offshore rigs. You understand? This isn't about saving people anymore. It's about slowing the collapse." That was the last thing he said, because a moment later, the emergency fire door burst inward, and the thing that used to be Yvonne staggered through. She was feral, bones twisted at wrong angles, mouth torn from her own spasms. Her fingernails had ripped backward from scratching. Her clothes were soaked in blood, her own or someone else's, I couldn't tell. Klein turned too late. She lunged. The gun fired once, wild. Then he was on the floor, screaming as her teeth tore into his neck. I ran, locked the server room door behind me, hit the secondary lockdown from the SCIADA panel. The inner doors sealed, hydraulic pins engaged. Through the security glass, I watched her writhe over Klein's body, blood splattering across the tile. It wasn't hunger, it was something else, like rage distilled into motion, like her body needed to spread the infection. Rourke appeared 10 minutes later, armed and armored. He cleared the room with trained precision, put Yvonne down with a 3-round burst to the chest. Klein was already dead. Rourke stood over him for a long time, then looked at me with the same unreadable calm. "We're out of time," he said. "The next phase is live." "What phase?" "District-level containment breach. We've got verified infections inside the Houston Loop. Downtown's already starting to receive reports of violence, grocery riots, mass panic, all from people who haven't even touched the water, just heard rumors. The fear spreads faster than the infection. Rourke stood still for a moment, watching the station monitors as if trying to decide what the next acceptable loss would be. Outside, the perimeter lights flickered with static interference, and the outer cameras showed nothing but dust trails from the last convoy that had pulled out less than an hour before. We were alone now. No rescue, no reinforcements. Just the ghosts of the decisions we had made. "What about the fail-safes?" I asked. "The remote isolation valves, the deep line check seals in the high-pressure districts. We can lock the contaminated loops." "You think they haven't already tried?" he replied flatly. "They sealed zones 6 through 9 3 hours ago. 2 of the actuated valves failed, overpressurized, and blew their risers. A third never responded. Some of your software still had legacy permissions. Contractors wrote dirty code. The infection bypassed most of the containment zones before the order even went out." He didn't say it as an accusation, but it felt like one. I had worked on that code. I'd integrated third-party telemetry bridges, trusting that the companies vetted by city procurement had done their due diligence. But now, in retrospect, I realized it wasn't just negligence. It was by design. Those vulnerabilities were built into the architecture, my architecture. Rourke motioned toward the door. "You've got one chance to get out. We've got a forward operating post in channel view that's still holding. After that, it's nothing but choke points and fire zones. If you want to live, you leave now." I hesitated only long enough to grab my laptop, a portable drive with the last 24 hours of system logs, and the handheld Hatchfield tester. Not because I thought I'd be doing any more water analysis, but because I needed something real in my hands. Something to remind me that I'd once been part of a system that worked. We exited through the side entrance, bypassing the main gate which had been half torn off its hinges during the last infected breach. Rourke drove a matte grey Ford Suburban with run-flat tyres and no plates. Inside the cabin, there were 2 M4 carbines clipped to the dash, a ruggedized tablet mounted in place of the rearview mirror, and a box of surgical masks on the passenger side floor. As we sped northeast toward channel view, the radio crackled intermittently with short-range encrypted bursts, mostly coded sit reps, troop positioning, resource allocation, no public frequencies. The civilian airwaves were dead, overridden by the same emergency loop that had been playing for the past 12 hours. "Do not consume municipal water. Seek shelter. Await further instructions." No mention of the virus, no mention of the infected. We passed through Baytown, my home, or what was left of it. The grocery store where I bought bottled water after hurricanes was smashed open. A flipped ambulance lay smouldering near the intersection at Garth and Baker. 2 pickup trucks had crashed into each other in front of a gas station, doors hanging open, blood on the windows. A third truck, a city utility vehicle, was parked half on the curb, its driver door wide open, keys still in the ignition. Inside, slumped over the wheel, was a man in a reflective vest, his neck torn nearly in half. "Don't stop," I said quietly. Rourke didn't. As we approached the San Jacinto River Bridge, we saw the first major exodus. Hundreds of people, on foot, on bicycles, even pushing grocery carts, streamed toward the outer counties. Most looked like families, still clinging to the idea that this was a temporary disaster, that maybe FEMA would step in, that maybe someone up there still had a plan. But there were no camps, no triage tents, no convoys of aid, only burning fuel, broken infrastructure, and the cold realization that the emergency response had collapsed beneath the weight of its own secrecy. We made it to the Channel View Forward Command Post just after nightfall. It was set up in the parking lot of an abandoned shipping depot along Sheldon Road, the entire perimeter ringed with HESCO barriers and concrete K-rails. Spotlights on generators cast harsh white beams across the checkpoint, and everyone who entered was sprayed down in a decontamination tent before being allowed in. I went through the full chemical wash, twice, while they checked my eyes for any discoloration or tracking behavior. Rourke didn't have to. He wore a pass on a retractable clip labeled OESA. Inside the perimeter, there were less than 50 people, military, CDC, a few engineers from the Corps, and one or two contractors who had clearly been brought in after the water system failures. One of them I recognized, Angela Rothman, a hydraulic modeling specialist I'd met at a conference in Dallas the year before. She didn't look up from her laptop when I approached, just muttered, "You're the one from Station 14. I nodded. "You working on a reversal map?" "Trying," she said. "But it's chaos. Half the isolation valves are dead, and we just got telemetry from Clear Creek, contaminated flow readings all the way to Galveston. The Gulf's already compromised. Is there a clean zone left?" She looked at me for the first time then, eyes hollow. "Maybe College Station. Maybe, if they close their mains in time." She didn't sound confident. Rourke handed off a sealed evidence bag containing my logs and laptop to a CDC virologist stationed in a tent converted into a makeshift lab. I watched as they immediately connected it to a Faraday isolated terminal. Everything was being analysed now. Every byte of data from every node, SCADA hub, control valve. They were trying to piece together the outbreak like it was still manageable. But it wasn't. That night, 2 of the guards were attacked by an infected man who had somehow made it into the camp staging area. He wasn't feral, not yet. He was lucid, walking with purpose, even speaking. Said his name was Michael. Said he needed help. He was clean-cut, calm, no fever. But when one of the medics took his vitals, he suddenly convulsed and bit her on the wrist. She screamed, dropped her tablet, and fell back. The guard opened fire without hesitation. 3 rounds to the chest, 1 to the neck. It barely slowed him. Rourke and I watched from the perimeter tower as the scene unfolded. Within minutes, both the medic and one of the guards were down. The body of the attacker finally went still after a full mag had been emptied into his spine. "This wasn't in the original symptom profile," Rourke muttered. "Lucid aggression, delayed onset. They're adapting." "You mean it's mutating?" He didn't answer, but his silence was enough. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on a cot inside a supply tent, surrounded by boxes of MREs and jugs of disinfectant, and replayed the events of the past 48 hours. I thought about the people drinking their morning coffee, brushing their teeth, washing vegetables, unknowingly absorbing the thing that would kill them, twist them into something else. And I thought about how my work, my hydraulic designs, my pressure simulations, my confidence in technology had made it all possible. Around 3 a.m., Rothman found me. She had something in her hand, a test result. "You need to see this," she said. The paper showed my blood markers, standard pathogen screen, immunoglobulin profile, antigen response curve. "You're immune," she said flatly. "Not a carrier, fully resistant. The compound doesn't bind to your neural receptors." "How?" I asked. "I drank the water. I injected the compound manually. I've been exposed a dozen ways." She shook her head. "Your genome. It's your genes, Ian. You've got a mutation. HLA. B27. High expression of beta defensin proteins. You metabolize the vector before it replicates." "Are there others?" "Not many. Maybe 1 in 20,000. I stared at the test. My name on it. A single outlier in a sea of infection. "That's why Rourke brought you out," she said. "Not to protect you, to watch you, to use you." I didn't sleep after that. By morning, Channelview was falling. The infected moved fast. They'd breached a cargo rail line that ran past the east fence. 20 or 30 of them swarming over the embankment before the guard tower spotted them. They weren't mindless. They were coordinated, fast, stronger than they should have been. And worst of all, they weren't alone. Some were freshly turned, still wearing their uniforms, still able to pretend they were okay. It was Rothman who shouted the warning. She saw one of the engineers, someone she'd worked with earlier, lunging toward a group of guards with a fire axe. His eyes were wrong. his hands twitching in a way that didn't match human instinct. 2 soldiers went down before anyone reacted. Gunfire erupted across the compound. Spotlights went out. Someone triggered the emergency evac beacon. 3 short bursts followed by a long tone. Rourke ran to me, rifle slung, blood on his vest. "We're pulling out. Now, grab what you need." I didn't think. I grabbed the test results, my backup drive, a field radio, and followed him through the chaos. Outside, chaos bloomed like an oil fire. It was the kind of thing you'd normally only see in warzones or old riot footage. The dark silhouettes of people moving erratically, shadows shifting against the amber glow of flames. The surreal wail of car alarms harmonizing with panicked screams. The parking lot was no longer a space for vehicles. It was a kill zone. Rothman vanished into the swarm, yanked from sight in seconds. I saw one of the figures that took her. A man in a blue Tyvek suit, the kind worn by industrial plant crews. His jaw was hanging unnaturally low, twitching as if trying to form words he no longer remembered. Thompson grabbed my collar and yanked me back from the loading dock's edge, just as a wrench sailed past, spinning end over end before clanging against the concrete. "Move!" he barked, leading us down a narrow corridor toward the backup access tunnel that ran parallel to the chemical injection lines. We ducked under a half-shuttered door as the power flickered overhead. Brownout cycles that meant grid collapse wasn't just possible, it was already underway. "They're moving faster than expected," he muttered, his voice more analytical than panicked. "Their coordination's wrong. This isn't random infection behavior. These patterns, they're converging on infrastructure. First comms, then power, now water. How?" I managed between breaths. "They're just infected. Sick people. They shouldn't be able to." "They're not just sick," he cut in. "They're programmed, not with chips, not with code, but with biology. Conditioned reflexes built into the viral payload. Someone designed this pathogen to retain certain neural pathways. Locomotion, target recognition, environmental adaptation, and most chilling group behavior, like ants or wolves." We emerged into the auxiliary utility trench, lit by flickering emergency lamps. A maintenance tram sat dead on the rail track, its power long gone. Overhead, the pipes groaned as pressure shifted, meaning someone, somewhere, was still rerouting water. Whether it was a failsafe or sabotage, I didn't know. Thompson activated a wireless panel on his tablet, syncing to a local server node in the wall. A green LED blinked. "We have 5 minutes before the fallback pressure valves trip. If they do, the outflow to central Houston resumes. That means 6,000 gallons a minute of virally active water hits the city grid again. Shut it down then," I said. "You've got control." He shook his head. "Not anymore. Someone upstream already triggered the override. They rerouted command protocols through the downtown SCADA node, the one you retrofitted 6 months ago." I froze. "What?" "You said it yourself," Thompson replied. "You didn't know the larger purpose of the update packages. All you did was run simulations and approve code. They used your name to validate the changes. No one questioned it. I never gave permission for..." "You didn't have to. Your credentials were harvested from the initial deployment shell, probably during that big infrastructure contract back in 2023, when you worked with the Army Corps on modular flood systems. They didn't need you to agree just to leave the door open." It was a staggering realization. My models, my system optimization curves, even the predictive leak mapping I'd spent months refining, it had all been leveraged to quietly ensure maximum flow coverage during the first outbreak wave. "So what now?" I asked, my voice dull, distant. "We stop the valves?" "No," Thompson said grimly, tapping on the pad. "We let them open." "What?" He looked at me like I was slow. "You're immune, right? That makes you more valuable than the system itself. You're one of less than 100 confirmed clean variables in the database. If the grid goes live again, containment fails permanently. But that also forces their hand. Whoever's running this will have to respond in person to secure the asset. You." You want to bait them, I said, incredulous. You're talking about flooding an entire zone with contaminated water just to get the people behind this to show up. They're not people anymore, he snapped. They're operators executing a full-spectrum biocontrol protocol. You're the deviation in the dataset. You're not just immune, you're a liability. You survived the vector and remember every deployment detail. You think they'll just let you walk? A dull thump echoed down the tunnel, then another. We turned to see motion near the far exit. Bodies silhouetted in the chemical mist, moving with too much coordination. A former security guard in a torn windbreaker crawled under a pipe. Another, an office tech by the look of his ID badge, twitched spasmodically as he scaled the scaffolding like a spider, ignoring the rebar slicing into his hands. "Fall back!" Thompson shouted. "Back to substation 7. We ran again, this time deeper underground, through concrete corridors that hadn't seen maintenance in a decade. The old transfer pumps still lined the walls like rusting fossils, their tags sun-faded and forgotten. Here, everything smelled of iron and mildew. The infected didn't hesitate. They came after us without sound or hesitation, drawn by movement, vibration, maybe even heat. By the time we reached the hatch at substation 7, Thompson was limping. His thigh had caught a piece of jagged conduit in the last dash. I helped him through and spun the locking wheel until the hatch hissed shut. Only then did I let myself breathe. "They'll breach that in 5 minutes, he said, sitting down and cradling his leg. "I need you to finish what I started." He handed me a metal key with a red Tagar Delta 3. I recognized the symbol from the early architecture diagrams. It was a manual switch. One of the original legacy valves predating automation, analog, off-grid, no remote override. "This is the last failsafe," he explained. "Buried under the old reactor cooling tunnels near the West Reservoir. You turn that key and the system goes into hard lockdown. No more pressure relays, no more downstream flow. But it's a one-way trip. Once it's engaged, there's no coming back." I hesitated. "And what happens to the rest of the city?" He didn't answer. Maybe he didn't have to. Outside the hatch, I could hear them now, scratching, breathing, the sound of teeth gnashing at steel. It wouldn't be long. I took the key, tucked it under my vest, and slung Thompson's sidearm over my shoulder, an old SIG P229, still with the agency's stamp etched into the frame. "You going to be okay?" He smiled faintly. "Doesn't matter. You're the mission now." I left him there, locking the second hatch behind me, sealing him off from the infected. Maybe he'd hold out. Maybe not. I didn't look back. The path to the West Reservoir wasn't marked. I had to retrace a maintenance schematic from memory, one I hadn't seen in months. The tunnels sloped downward, past old sediment filters and water test chambers, long since decommissioned. Feral cats had once lived down here, feeding off rats and runoff. Now only silence remained. I reached the lower chamber just as the backup lights flickered and died. The emergency generator had finally given out. I moved by headlamp alone, tracing the corrugated walls until I found the sealed intake vault. The analog switch was hidden behind a pressure plate, bolted under a rust-covered steel housing. I inserted the key. It took effort. Years of corrosion had built up resistance, but the mechanism still turned. A mechanical clunk echoed in the chamber, followed by a long hiss of depressurization. All at once, the mainline flow dropped. The distant roar of water slowed to a trickle. System lockdown complete. I stood in the dark, alone, the key still warm in my hand. Above me, the city burned. The screams had started to fade, replaced by silence, the kind that hangs after something breaks too far to fix. But I wasn't finished. They thought they'd used me, that I was a cog in their design. But I know the systems better than they ever will. And if I help spread it, then maybe, just maybe, I can help end it. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.